It's the Palestinian areas into little islands, as I showed you earlier. It includes the entire Jordan River Valley, which Israel is now claiming for both a military zone and nature park, as well as having put a lot of settlements there. It includes the South Hebron Hills, where I worked, and it's heavily populated by Israeli settlements, and I call them illegal because under the Fourth Geneva Convention and United Nations Resolutions 242 and 338, they are not legal under international law. So, I want to talk about settlements. You'll often see in the newspapers an estimate of about 300,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank. We think of a settlement and we get this Daniel Boone picture of a fort in our heads with, maybe 20 or 30 people and a little bit of an army protecting them. And that's reminiscent of our Wild West. That just comes to mind, okay? But actually, the settlements are on large amounts of land and really are better represented in your mind by a mid-sized city. They're constantly expanding, and that 300,000 figure is an underestimate. According to Prayer Balian, who is the Middle East envoy for the Carter Center and with whom I spent a weekend not long ago at the Carter Center event, there are close to 600,000 settlers in the occupied West Bank at this time. This is one of those settlements. This is the settlement of Efrat. We had a chance to tour it and speak with one of its administrators during our midterm. We had a week in Israel touring around. Efrat is part of a large settlement block called Gush Etzion. Because of this settlement block and other things that are going on related to the occupation, the Bethlehem Governorate. A governorate is kind of like, think about a county in your mind. The Bethlehem Governorate has 13% of its land for Palestinians, and the rest is taken by the occupation. This is the settlement of Ma'ale Adumin, which is to the east of Jerusalem. It is one small section of it. It is also a good-sized city with a large population. The thing about the settlement of Ma'ale Adumin is that as it expands, it will come in contact with that Area C near the Jordan River Valley. It is encroaching on it now, and will effectively cut the north part of the West Bank apart from the south part of the West Bank, making it difficult for Palestinians in the north to get through to be in commerce or conversation with those in the south. This is the village of Susia. Susia is one of the villages that we spend a lot of time in the South Hebron Hills. So I just put this slide in now so that you could compare the lifestyle, if you will. Susia has an interesting history I'll talk more about in a few minutes. Children and dogs, thank God, are the same the world over. Susia is a tent village. It is under a demolition threat. The entire village is under an imminent threat of demolition, which will displace about 400 people. One of the handouts that's free in the back is a United Nations document about the village of Susia. What we have been recommending to people who would like to make a difference after these presentations is that if you want to say something about this situation in Susia, you could take that document, fold it up with a letter of your own, and mail it to your congressperson. If you would like to have one in color, it's easily accessible on the United Nations website. It's UN OCHA, O-C-H-A, but it should say on the document itself how to find it on the web. Area C now remains under full Israeli military control, and Palestinians living in Area C are facing increasing pressure to relocate. It has been suggested by some analysts that Israel may be engaged in forcing a quiet population transfer to areas A or B. Now, what does it mean for it to be under full Israeli military control? It means that if something happens to you as a Palestinian in Area C, who you call, is the Israeli army, because that's who's in control. So you basically don't have much recourse for the purpose of getting some assistance. We'll talk more about this. But what history has shown us is that there is a strategy going on with more and more settlements built in Area C. Area C is the white portion of this map. And as you can see, the little blue marks are the settlements. There are also Israeli-only roads that go between these beige areas, which are the areas A and B that the Palestinians are using. And so Palestinians have limited access to those roads, and in some places they're not allowed to use them at all, so they've had to build secondary roads, and you'll see some of those and what they look like in the south part of the West Bank in a minute. But it causes this progression of Area C being taken more and more by settlements and Israeli-only roads has caused progressive fragmentation and difficulty in daily life. This map is courtesy of Friends of Sabeel, and you can get a copy of it on the map cards that I've provided in the back. I'm going to talk about the two hands of occupation. This is just my synthesis as I've reflected on my experience. On the one hand, we have the progressive growth of the illegal settlements taking more and more land and natural resources, including water, farmland, and land to graze animals. On the other hand, we have demolition, harassment, and dispossession, which makes living in Area C more and more difficult for the indigenous Palestinian and Bedouin populations. So an example of this, when I knew I would be living in the city of Yatta, I looked it up on the web to see how big it was, and I learned that it was 35,000 people. Interestingly, when I arrived 3 weeks later, I found that it was 100,000 people. What happened between 35,000 and 100,000 is that more and more people moved into Yatta from Area C. The face of occupation, what occupation looked like for me as a person living in Yatta and working in these small villages, taking depositions, that's a bad word, I shouldn't use that word, taking reports. Depositions sounds too legal. We did give our reports to the quartet, to the United Nations, and to our consular representatives. So they weren't just things we kept to ourselves. But from the reports and the things that I saw, the face of occupation includes incursions into homes, such as when a group of soldiers might need a bed for the night, so they would force themselves into a home, make the population go into a back bedroom, and then they would stay there for the night. Permit regimes and fixed and flying checkpoints. What does a checkpoint that's flying look like? Well, it means that you're driving along the road and you're pulled over by a Humvee, and one soldier stays in the vehicle and 3 get out. One of them engages you in conversation. Who are you? Can I see your ID? Where are you from? Where are you going? Why are you here? And so on. Who is this? Pointing to our Palestinian driver. While he's doing this in either a polite or a not so polite way, depending on a number of factors, the other 2 soldiers that got out of the vehicle are standing like this, pointing at you. And this happened to me on more than one occasion. Searches and seizures, while that's going on, vehicles are searched. While people are in your home, they might look around, see what you've got, maybe take a laptop or something. Cameras, video cameras, anything with data. It's not unusual to have those things taken. Arrests, detentions, transfers of populations. I took a report from one man who was arrested in the southern part of the West Bank, transported into the south part of Israel, interrogated, and then left in Israel to find his way back across the Greenland to the West Bank. which is a population transfer and made him an illegal person, basically. Assaults and beatings, I'll talk more about that. Confiscation of property or damage to your property, demolitions of structures, not giving building permits for necessary improvements to property, and water policy discrimination. All of these things are happening. They are all things that I saw, and we will move on from there. While I was in Jerusalem, I was visiting with the EAs that were living there, and that's just part of the EAPPI program. We were called to attend a demolition in the Bedouin village of Jabba, which is just to the north of Jerusalem proper. These children are looking on as their sheep and goats come in from the field and try to find the shelters that have been destroyed by the bulldozers while the sheep and goats were out in the field. There was a woman in this village whose home was destroyed. She's in the next slide. The picture over to the left is a demolition in the village of Al-Khair, which is the Bedouin village that Suleiman lives in, and a child looking through the rubble. This woman was trying to take in what remains of her possessions and her tent after the bulldozer has left. And because she looked so distraught, I went to stand by her with an interpreter from the United Nations who spoke fluent Arabic. And she kept taking my arm like this because she just needed human contact. And so I thought she would want to tell me about this demolition. But as a matter of fact, what she wanted to tell me about was that 6 months before, in the middle of the night, some Israeli soldiers had come to her house and without telling her why had ransacked all their belongings looking for something, although they never took anything. Then they began to touch her girls in a way that bothered her boys, and so her boys got in between the soldiers and the girls. I'm not exactly sure what else they might have done, but they felt the need to protect the girls. They were arrested, and she has not seen or heard of them since and has no way of contacting them. They are minor children. I believe she said they were around 12 and 14, and she does not know where they are. So, faced with the demolition of her home, what she wanted to tell me was that her family had been so deeply impacted by the occupation that she had lost her children. Demolitions have been on the increase this year, according to United Nations statistics, displacing 1,100 Palestinians, and this is coupled with rapid settlement expansion, as I mentioned. And in the past 2 months, the rate of increase has also gone up. So we're not seeing a good trend. These two girls have a story that I need to tell you about. This is not my picture. And I will tell you why. Ecumenical accompaniers provide protective presence, go to checkpoints in the middle of the night, and take a lot of reports. And as a result, our program is wise and absolutely requires that we take days off. And we are to hold them as sacred. So I took Thanksgiving Day off. And I was in a retreat center called Tantor Theological Institute in Jerusalem while this was happening. This picture is part of a video which was done by a Jewish-Israeli human rights activist named Guy Batavia, who belongs to a group called the Villages Group, and who came when he heard that there were demolitions going on in this village of Fagara. Now, Fagara came to EAPPI's attention 2 weeks prior to this because they had electrical poles that were beginning to give them some hope that they might have electric infrastructure in the village. Prior to this, they had no electricity. And this was an initiative of the Palestinian Authority, but because Fagra is in Area C, the Israeli army bulldozed their electrical poles before the electricity could be put into effect. So we went at that time and talked with the village and introduced ourselves. Then it became Thanksgiving. I was on break. And so when this happened, I was not there. In fact, I was about ready to go to worship in the retreat center. I had my telephone off because it had been alarming for demolitions. We subscribed to demolition alerts, so whenever something was being demolished, we would get a message. And it was my day off, and I just didn't want to know because I was not permitted to respond to them. So I was walking into the chapel next to a Lutheran pastor who was also going to eat Thanksgiving dinner there, and he also subscribes to these demolition alerts, so his phone went off. Takes out his phone, he looks at it, and he says, "Oh, it's Fagra. Oh, it's a demolition of a mosque. That'll be on the news." Did you hear about the demolition of Fagra's mosque on Thanksgiving Day? I didn't think so. It wasn't just a mosque. It was also 2 dwellings and several shelters for animals. Now, the story of these girls is the one that's holding her hands over her face is Sausan. She's 21. And the other one is Amal. She's 17. And Sausan was inside a cave dwelling with 3 small children when she heard bulldozers. And so, not knowing where the bulldozers were going, she got the children out of the cave. Because even a cave can get a demolition order if there have been any improvements to it, any changes to it. And so she got the kids out, and when she came out and her eyes adjusted to the light, she saw that it was her house, her shelter, it was a tent kind of shelter, that was about to be demolished. So she ran toward it because she wanted to be sure that the things that she needed that were in there would be out. She was intercepted by a soldier who sprayed her at point-blank range with pepper spray. Well, it's kind of awful to get pepper spray in your eyes, I hear. It's not happened to me. But as I understand it, it's considered torture if you don't administer first aid to someone who has been pepper sprayed in the eyes. So she started to cry, "Give me water for my eyes." And one of the soldiers opened a water bottle, put a couple drops of water in each of her eyes, and then poured the water out on the ground. The reason that I know these things is that after Thanksgiving and after these girls got out of prison, I went to Fagra and took their report. So this is what they told me. Well, her cousin, Amal, heard her crying, "Give me water," and she brought a bottle of water to her cousin. And one of the soldiers grabbed her by the wrist like this, and she spilled water on the soldier. As a result, she was arrested and tried with assault. And both of them were taken to Jerusalem and kept in a prison in the city of Jerusalem for a week without a lawyer, without any access to their families, and then were brought before the court for a hearing, and their families were then allowed to post bail, and they came home. That was the point at which the EAPPI had access to the girls and came to get their report. In the process of all this, Sausan's mother also tried to intervene, was pushed to the ground, and her leg was broken. So when we met them, Sausan's mother was recovering from the leg break, and the girls were telling us this story. They told us through a male interpreter, our driver. So we did not get from them that Amal apparently was also touched inappropriately during her arrest. And she told this to a Jewish activist who works for a group called Checkpoint Watch, Maxim Watch. And that's a report that was filed by Maxim Watch. But she couldn't tell us because our interpreter was male, and it's culturally inappropriate to talk about such things in the presence of a man that you're not related to. Neither of the girls had to do any more prison time, but the family had to pay, at last count, they had paid 20,000 shekels in court costs. If you divide that by 3.5, you get a rough amount of how much that would be in dollars. This is what the mosque looked like after the demolition. By the time we came to take the report from the girls, it was mostly rebuilt and it already had received a new demolition order. This is what it looks like today, so far still standing. That's a picture from one of the EAs that's currently in the region. This is a video I'm going to see if I can make work. This is a video that shows something that happened just before I arrived. It is an EAPPI video that was done by the South Hebron Hills team ahead of me. It is the demolition of electrical infrastructure for the Palestinian village of Kirbet Goen al-Fauqa, which is near the Green Line. And I'll just run that now, I hope. The electricity had been brought by the Palestinian Authority from the city of Asamu in Area A. But because it was permanent infrastructure being built in Area C, it was removed by the Israeli army. It happened basically the week before we arrived. It's Hebrew and Arabic, so don't be surprised if you don't understand it. Notice the soldiers standing by while the work is done. This village, the first time we visited them was about 10 days after they lost their electricity. They still had hopes that they might have a legal recourse, but when I checked with Rabbis for Human Rights lawyer, she said there's absolutely nothing that can be done. The last time we went to Kirbet Goen al-Fauqa, they had lost their hope. Not only about electricity, but about a lot of other things. They were very, very sad people. Women tried to act as human shields in some cases. Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel is a program you can apply to if you are 25 years or older and interested in making a difference as an eyewitness in the Holy Land. It was established in 2001 when the churches in Palestine came to the World Council of Churches and said, please come and help us. We need witnesses. We need people to accompany us. EAPPI, as its source of authority, calls upon the United Nations resolutions related to Palestine and Israel, international law, especially the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is readily available to read on the web. It's rather long, so I didn't print it for you. And the Palestinian churches have also created a movement called the Kairos Movement, and the Kairos document, which is a document that states that the occupation is a sin against God and humanity and cries for the world to help it end. The EAPPI mission is to provide protective presence, monitor and report human rights abuses, support Israelis and Palestinians working for a just peace, and network humanitarian aid. So, for instance, if we go into an area where normal humanitarian workers do not go, and we see an issue, we could find them assistance or refer them. And we do advocacy and education to end the occupation for the sake of a just peace based on respect of international law. I'll let you look up the Kairos document if you want. It's on one of the handouts, so you could feel free to learn more about that and what the churches have said with one voice, Catholic, Lutheran, Anglican, Orthodox, about the situation. EAs accompany people in daily life, monitor the abuses, report them, provide support in nonviolent activities, which I'll show you more about, and protect vulnerable populations, stand in solidarity with the churches. We network. It's very important to understand that when you're on the ground, there's little you can do by yourself. You need to work within a community, and there are a lot of NGOs on the ground. Operation Dove is an Italian peace organization that's kind of working from the Francis of Assisi peacemaker idea. Christian peacemaker teams, International Solidarity Movement, B'Tselem, UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders is MSF, the churches, the Palestinian Authority. There are a lot of Israeli human rights organizations on the ground. They are extremely important. The Villages Group spends a lot of time in the villages. They are Israeli Jews who are concerned about the human rights impact of the occupation, and they are befriending Palestinians in village communities and helping them individually and as a community to have electric power, to have better access to water, to have better opportunities. Rabbis for Human Rights helps provide legal aid. Other Voice is an organization we met when we went to Sderot. Sderot is an Israeli city that we visited. It is right next to Gaza, within about a mile and a half of Gaza. They have received a huge number of Qassam rockets over a period of, quite a long time. They were witnesses to Operation Cast Lead. And the organization, Other Voice, that came out of Sderot, has taken the stand, please don't hurt Gazans on our behalf. They have pleaded with the Israeli government, find another way to have peaceful relations with the people of Gaza. And they themselves have formed relationships by telephone and Skype with individuals and groups in Gaza, so that they are trying to model new ways of communication even across what seems to be an unbridgeable divide. We also networked with diplomats. The quartet, our consulates and embassies, our elected representatives, the State Department, the Carter Center, and the European Union leaders. The EAs are in, if you just look at the blue map and start at the top, these are the names of the cities where we're located: Tulkarem, Jayus, Yanun, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, and the South Hebron Hills, which is the place to be. As you can see, I was very far south in the West Bank, and we'll learn more about that. I'm going to zoom through the other placements because I really want to tell you about my placement, but I need to tell you a little bit about the others. in Jerusalem, monitoring the worker checkpoint at Calandia is a very important job because a large number of Palestinian workers have to go through it in the middle of the night every single day. So the EAs in Jerusalem go to Calandia 4 nights a week, arriving at about 3:30 in the morning and staying until about 7 to monitor for human rights issues. They also work in various neighborhoods related to house demolitions, arrests of minors, home evictions. This is the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. That EA is in Sheikh Jarrah, just being a presence there at this point, probably at the end of a demonstration. Sheikh Jarrah is a neighborhood that illegal settlers are taking over house by house at gunpoint. And I know this because I went in 2009 with the EAs that were living in Jerusalem at that time. I met them strictly by coincidence, or some of us would say it was a God thing. And they asked me to come with them because a family had been evicted that day from their home, and they were camping out on the sidewalk. And the EAs wanted to go be with them. So I went with them, much against my better judgment, because it seemed, as I say, to be a God thing. And when I got there, I saw an elder who was, actually I saw a 3-generation family sitting around a barrel full of wood that was on fire to keep them warm. And there was this older woman that really touched my heart. She just looked cold, and I thought, well, I have to do something. I had a shawl, so I was going to give it to her. I got down on one knee, and I said to her, I'm very sorry that you lost your home. Immediately, she realized that I hadn't said, I'm very sorry that you lost your home, or anything with any kind of accent. So she said, where are you from? And I said, I'm from the United States of America. You know, most Americans don't know that we give $3 billion a year to support the nation of Israel, but most Palestinians do know this. And so she looked right through me. Her eyes looked into my heart, and she said, how can you support this? I lived in this home for 43 years. And that's, I think, when I became an EA in my heart and knew that I would try to apply to this program and to do this work. So EAs do that sort of thing. In Silwan, which is a Palestinian neighborhood in East Jerusalem, there happens to be Hezekiah's Tunnel, which is a tunnel that runs underneath the old city and comes out in Silwan. And at one end of it is a pool, which is believed to be the pool of Siloam, a pool that Jesus sent someone to wash his eyes off in, and the man was healed. Here it is. And archaeology is well underway, both to excavate under the city to learn more about Hezekiah's Tunnel and also to excavate the Pool of Siloam itself. And an archaeological park is planned, but it's Jerusalem, so any place you dig in Jerusalem is going to have archaeological ruins of some significance. It is also a very highly populated city, and so it is necessary to apply ethical filters wherever you dig and to decide what you're going to do archaeologically with also the people living there in mind, and that is not happening in Silwan. So playgrounds and neighborhoods are being adversely affected as this goes on. The wall runs into neighborhoods in East Jerusalem that should show you something about the impact of the separation wall. It's pretty hard to get from one side to the other. Businesses are very adversely affected. Children getting to school, just everyday life. This is a rooftop view of the old city of Jerusalem, and you can see that there are Israeli flags in the Arab quarter. What that means is that the homes there have been taken by Israeli settlers, and so the people that lived there before have been driven away. And there are 5 of them in that picture, I think. Bethlehem. In Bethlehem, EAs monitor checkpoint 300, which is part of the separation wall that keeps Bethlehem encircled by the wall. The checkpoint is their access out. They visit camps, refugee camps, respond to demolitions. And I have another video, which is a checkpoint video. How many of you have seen a checkpoint video before? Okay. Did you?
Yeah, I am from Mandarin.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you have some first-hand experience about checkpoints.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. It's not very long. I will show it. This is a Maxim Watch video. The day I went from Bethlehem to Jerusalem and ended up in Sheikh Jarrah, I was in this checkpoint for... It took me 5 hours to get from Bethlehem to Jerusalem.
كل يوم موت كل يوم يصير واحد يدفع الثاني يجيب لك سر من هون ويجيب لك سر يعني انا بعرف ناس كثير كسر العظم تبعه والله
They're hurrying because it takes so long to get through.
يكون هذا ملان وهون يسكروا كمان شوي يصير هذا وجه راسي ما جوا ما فيش محل ما في هناك في 12 شباك على المغرب يمكن في 3 4 بس لا المكان اشتري شو الحضرون شدت لأنه ما بعرف المادة لتزرع لا وغير نكاليوم غير كنيسة مثل بشيش بحيث بلاد يعني سنة بتفاصطور شيء نقيا بنقاط يعني المقيا بحيث شعر عاد شمون يعني المقيا عديش يشان شيء مقيا بشيش لشعر الشيء عزيز نقيا كان بشوش بحيث أكبران يعصر
This is normal, but sometimes it's worse because lines are closed. And the men keep going in, but they're not going out. I don't have my own video here because we were only the second team in the South Hebron Hills, and the checkpoint we manned did not permit us to do any videotaping. But there was one day when there had been targeted assassinations from Israel into Gaza, and as a result, Gaza had sent more Qassam rockets. And so as collective punishment all through the West Bank, these checkpoints became terrible bottlenecks, and the men inside were screaming and banging the walls. I was there that Sunday morning, not at that checkpoint, but at mine, at Meitar. And I will tell you, I had to leave my post because it wasn't safe for me to stand there. From a distance, I called the DCO, which is the Israeli authority in charge of the checkpoint, and I said, this is dangerous. The men are in trouble. There is a lot of yelling and screaming and banging, and it's very disturbing. Please open more lines. I called 5 times, but I got no response. I called the International Committee of the Red Crescent and explained to them what was happening, and then they told me it's because of collective punishment. It's happening all over the West Bank because of the Qassam rockets, and you won't be able to change it. At that point, I called the United Nations, and I said what was happening, and, the men want me to fix it, and I can't. And then they called the Army, and about a half an hour later, things started to lighten up a little bit, and I felt this was very emotional to me, this stay. It was really difficult. But at a certain point, even though we had a strict rule that in order to be allowed at the checkpoint, we mustn't take pictures, because the crowd was so thick and the men were so disheartened, I took out my camera, and shielded by their bodies, I took a number of pictures. And as I took out my camera, the men around me quietly started to chant one of the few English words they knew: work, 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 because A, they really needed to get to work, and B, they really wanted me to document what was happening. So I wish I had video of that, but the Maxim Watch video tells us better. I'm going to skip through some of these things just in the interest of time and move south. I want to talk a little bit about the city of Hebron, or Al-Khalil. It contains the tomb of the patriarchs and is the second most sacred Jewish site after the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. It is also sacred to Islam because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are common ancestors of both Jewish and Islamic religion. So half of it is a mosque and half of it is a synagogue. Entry on either side is through a checkpoint where you have to do metal detection and have all your bags searched. I was not permitted to enter the Ibrahimi Mosque, Tomb of the Patriarchs, on either side because I was wearing the peace vest. So the soldiers with guns wouldn't let me go in to pray because I was wearing the peace vest. And I was going to try again later, but I ended up having to take press to a village in the other direction and didn't ever get a chance to go back. So on my next trip, I'm going to go in without the vest. There's a lot of racism in Hebron. One has the opportunity to say apartheid if one wants. In this particular city, it's pretty naked racism. And what has happened in Hebron is that a whole street called Shuhada Street has been closed by the Israeli authorities, driving most of the Arab merchants in the area out of business. And there's a school on that street called Cordoba School, which is a Palestinian school that the EAs guard the children going to and from school every day because they're harassed by the Israeli illegal settlers. And they have to go through checkpoint screening and a bag search by the Israeli soldiers. Sometimes the settlers in the street dump sewage down their school exit point, so they have to walk through raw sewage on their way out of school. So EAs protect them by their presence from worse than that, and also spend a lot of time in the old city with those merchants who are still in business in order to show that they're in solidarity with them. This is sprayed on a front door of a Palestinian home near Shuhada Street, and that is my photograph. I saw that with my eyes. EAs walking down Shuhada Street. As you can see, these storefronts are locked. They have actually been welded shut, and no Palestinians are allowed to walk on this street. It leads to the Ibrahimi Mosque. This was done as a result of the Goldstein Massacre. How many of you know about the Goldstein Massacre? Okay. A Jewish man went into the Ibrahimi Mosque and opened fire on Palestinians at prayer, killing a large number and wounding more. And as a result, Shuhada Street, which was a Palestinian street, was closed by the authorities to protect the Israeli population in the city from reprisals. Figure that out. Collective punishment backwards. At one point, stricter searches were ordered for the children, and as a result, the teachers came out into the street and taught the children in the street in an act of civil disobedience because they refused to require the children to have further screening. So for about 2 weeks, English lessons were taught by EAs along with the teachers in the street. Children are sometimes escorted by EAs in Hebron because there is an unfortunate activity that goes on where the military will take boys into custody. Sometimes boys sometime around age 10, they will take them into custody, accuse them of stone throwing, arrest them, and they can hold them without charge for days. They can be imprisoned without trial for up to 3 months, and during that time have no access to their families. If they sign a confession, they get released sooner. Boys in this circumstance show a lot of post-traumatic stress syndrome, sometimes starting bedwetting, and I have heard women say that they advise other women not to have children because having my son in prison is too hard. The South Hebron Hills. Previously, the EAs in Hebron were doing the South Hebron Hills twice a week, and Hebron 3 days a week, or the rest of the week, or however that worked out. It didn't work because more and more stuff was happening in Area C, and Hebron wasn't lightening up either, so the group before me was the first to have a placement in the South Hebron Hills. We were the second group. That means that I was one of 8 people that were international that had ever lived in the city of Yatta, which made for some interesting conversations with children who don't know much English but sure know that I didn't look like a Palestinian woman. Area C, you know where Area C is now because I showed you. This is part of Area C here. This is the South Hebron Hills area. Previously, this has been a closed military zone. There's been another one over here where my villages are that I visited, a little corridor that wasn't closed. What this yellow is about is, this was leaked in Haaretz last week. This is planned to be an area for settlement construction now. Previously, it was called a closed military zone. Israel needed it for security purposes. But now they've decided that they are going to plant settlements in this area, which will expand from the existing settlements. Eventually, you can see this is going to connect with this, and this will probably connect with that. So, strategic plan. I can't deny that that's my interpretation. This has been in the works for a while, but it's just now being made public. It's a wide area with many small Palestinian villages. Occasionally they'll also have homes in Yatta, but mostly they live on the land because they are shepherders by profession, and without their sheep they have no livelihood. There are some other villages which are Bedouin, such as Dekaika and Al-Khair, and they have no alternative residences. Again, we get back to Area C. In this case, it's the Brown region. They had 3 years of drought before we got there. They have no access to the deep water aquifer, and they get water by buying it from Israel from specific sites and truck it into the villages where they can store it in holes they dig into the limestone, which are cisterns. You'd think that they were wells, but they are not connected with water underneath. They're connected with trucks that put water in them. This is the area of the South Hebron Hills that I worked in predominantly. We'll be talking about several of these villages, and if I have time, we'll also talk about this area, which is called the Seam Zone, because this is the international armistice line. That's what the internationals recognize as the border between the West Bank and Israel, but this is where Israel wants it to be, and this is where the checkpoint is. So, why they want that, there is a settlement here called Mesedot Yehuda, which they would actually like to be on the Israeli side, and there's also an Israeli army base over here. Unfortunately for the people of Asifer, there is a little village, Palestinian village, in the middle between Mesedot Yehuda and the army base. It is a village of 3 extended Palestinian families, and the children have to go, they have to go to a mazel, to school, because they go to school in Palestine. This is the seam zone, neither Palestine nor Israel. Oh.
Sure. This will help you.
Yeah. Okay. The children have to go to school in Palestine. They live in what's almost a no man's land from their point of view. We'll get to them. This is my team, including our driver Abed. There's Abed. This is his dad. His dad's name is Mohammed Nawaja. Mohammed Nawaja started out his family in a cave village not far from what is now the village of Susia. The people there had lived there for a long time, but there were archaeological ruins on the site. And when Israel discovered these archaeological ruins, they drove the people away from the caves. And the people came back, so they drove them away again. And the people came back, so they drove them away again. And the 4th time, they came in the middle of the night, put them in trucks, and drove them 20 kilometers away and deposited them in the dirt out in the middle of nowhere. So the villagers were somewhat scattered, but some of them came back a 5th time and built a tent village on the agricultural lands that they owned, not far from the caves where they had previously been living. So, somewhere along the line, Mohammed Nawaja had his first son, somewhere in the middle of all this struggle, and he named his son Jihad, which in Arabic means struggle. That meant that when I met him, he was known as the father of jihad, because that's what happens to your name when you are a man who has a son in this region. So his wife's name was Jihad, the mother of jihad, and only recently have I learned that her real name was Zahriya. Abu Jihad became very dear to me, despite his name, which we would take to be a little scary. He's a very gentle, peaceful, and nonviolent person, and is the village elder of Susia. Now, here is another resident of Susia, whose name escapes me at the moment, but he received his first demolition order on his tent while he was making the Hajj, which means it was Ramadan. He had gone to Mecca. And the demolition order arrived tucked under a rock near his tent, and when he came home, he found it. But the court date had passed. So when we took the orders from him, he had the second one, and after that it was just a matter of time before the bulldozers came. And they came on Thanksgiving Day while I was on my retreat, and that was the second alarm that my friend's telephone did that day. This was his house and barn. This is his house and barn disappearing on Thanksgiving Day. The school in Susia is under a demolition order. These are the children having a demonstration in hopes that they can make a difference. This is my friend Samiha Nawaja. She's Abed's sister-in-law. She is a shepherdess. She's out with the sheep. She and I went out shepherding with her son. And she let me take this picture, but hoped I wouldn't put it on the internet. I could use it just to share with people. Here she is shepherding. Here she is making tea for me. And here she is 3 days ago. She was out shepherding when 7 men from the nearby Israeli settlement, wearing masks, attacked her with stones and metal pipes. I'm told she'll be fine. She embroidered this scarf, so I'm wearing it today for her. It's very emotional when it's your people and you hear these things. These are some of her children. It was very hard for them. I'll talk about water and then maybe I should stop for questions. Well, no, I'll go a little longer. It's 8:15. People, if you need to take a break, just go and come, because I have so much I need to share. Is that all right? Okay. All right. This is a cistern being dug in Susia. They can't use equipment that would draw attention to the fact that they're digging a hole, because then the work would be demolished and the army would come and fill it in. So they're trying to be quiet about it. There's a guy down there actually with a pickaxe who's cutting all the limestone out. This is how water is gotten out of the cisterns when they're completed. And then those big barrels are toted to the tents, and the women use the water for their daily activites. After a drought year, everybody has to take their turn with the water. And in Al-Khair, where this picture was taken, water was in very short supply. Their water supply had been impacted by the nearby settlement of Carmel, which was imposing some adversity on their access to water. I don't really have time to go into that too much, but this is a typical dwelling. This is the tent in a village called Mantikat Balbutum, and some children who live there. They really like balloons if you happen over. This is the access road to their village. It's been bulldozed shut. Roadblocks are a method of harassment in the South Hebron Hills. If you depend on a water truck for your water, then you can see that this is a very serious method of harassment in a drought-stricken area. This is a water truck trying to get over a roadblock, which is in this case not a boulder but an earth berm, and is stuck. So you can see that's a pretty effective method of making life difficult in a drought area. Comet Me is an organization that is providing alternative energy to villages. This one is 3 windmills in Mantikat Balbutum that were put up in December. And they have worked in several of these little villages that I showed you on the map. What they have installed since December is all under demolition order. The Israeli army wants to take these out because they're permanent infrastructure in Area C. Israel will tell you that it's because they didn't apply for a building permit, but historically no building permits that have been applied for have been granted to Palestinians in Area C. So people have stopped applying for them. This is Jabal. He wants to plant barley to feed his sheep, but his cistern needs annual maintenance. Here's what happens in this time of year, anticipating that it might rain in the winter, which is the only time it rains. Jabal will take a sledgehammer and open a hole into the top of the cistern. And then because the cistern is low and the hills around it slope toward it, he will dig trenches so that the rainwater goes into the trenches and then drifts towards the cistern. And then since he's made a big hole there and he wants the water as clean as possible, he'll take some thorn bushes and stuff them in the hole so the water can go in, but the rocks and the manure and so on probably won't. And then he can use that water to irrigate or to water his sheep. The problem is that when he went to work on his cistern the day before we arrived, the Israeli soldiers nearby drove him away at gunpoint from doing this required maintenance. So we came and accompanied him the next day, and This time he was allowed to do the work. And this is my roommate, Jan, and I'm taking the picture. And she's asking how they are, and they're saying that they're really bored. There's not much going on around the Army base, and so that's part of the motivation, I think, for this harassment is just because there's absolutely nothing. But there's also the fact that it is an occupation, and occupations only exist because the occupier has to show power. They have to show their presence. And so this is the sort of activity that is engaged in. We pitched in to help because this is actually a military zone. It was Jabal's field long before it was a military zone, but now the Army has their outpost there and so on. So we were digging with sledgehammers and we kept coming across unexploded bullets. Maybe we shouldn't have been doing that, but we managed to liberate the cistern that day. This man is plowing. He was also a high security risk and was driven away the day before we came to provide protective presence, and he was allowed to plow his field. Protective presence sometimes takes place at night. In Susia and in Wadi Jahesh, there are violent things in their history where settlers have come in. In Susia, settlers have put car parts down cisterns to contaminate them. They've burned tents while people were sleeping in them. And as I told you, there have been physical assaults. So we would come as night fell and we would sleep in the village. And before we went to sleep, before it got dark, we would walk around with our vests on in case anybody with binoculars wanted to see if the people were alone. And we would get up first thing in the morning and do the same thing. A lot of this violence took place on the Sabbath, so we would sleep over on Friday night and stay over until Saturday afternoon. This is Wadi Jahesh. That's where Zahara lives that I showed you. That's where I spent many a night coloring by flashlight with her. Her home is under a demolition order now, and also the electricity that they have through the Comet Me installations. And there I am, just to prove I was there, with Alia, whose tent it is, and Mahara, and some other members of the family. This is the village of Dakaika. Dakaika is a village of Bedouins. The entire village of Dakaika is under a demolition order. All structures, including cisterns, toilets, the school, animal shelters, and homes. Dakaika is in a desirable location. Israel would like to remove it. The court battle's been going on for many years, but it became a little bit more nerve-wracking, and the lawyers from Rabbis for Human Rights asked us to do some advocacy, so we brought the Associated Press down and some other press to see the village. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any American media to come to Dakaika to see this story. And then the Associated Press finally came just before I left. But they never wrote a story about it that I know of. Dakaika is along the black line, way over on the left, in between the two closed military zones, in an area that Israel would like to just take the villages out of that area. They really want to vacate all these villages if they can. This is a typical Bedouin dwelling. We're not talking very materialistic here. Sorry about that. Okay, in Dakaika there were classroom demolitions, so we came to document those. And there was rebuilding going on courtesy of UNICEF. UNICEF came to this school and did some mental health and play activities with the children because they were so traumatized by the demolitions. These girls said I could take their picture and use them in presentations if I wanted to. So, it's about kids. This village is Imnazel. Imnazel is where the school is that the children in the seam zone have to go to. It has somewhere between 300 and 400 people living in pretty bad poverty, and they have the school, which is a regional primary school, so kids from the other villages are bused in or brought in or walk in. All the electricity for Mnazel comes from these 2 solar panels, which were put in by the Spanish Foreign Ministry's money a couple of years ago. And Israel's military delivered a demolition order to this facility by leaving it under a rock. So it happened to be found by the villagers in time for them to take it to court. Rabbis for Human Rights is appealing the decision to the High Court, and they asked us to do diplomatic work to try to make this situation visible so that the village of Mnazel could continue to have refrigeration and lights and electricity for the school. Here we are taking a report of the solar panels situation, and here we have Walter Miller and Mary Alexander, economic and ecologic officers of the U.S. Consulate, who have come to talk to Rabbi Eric Asherman, the founder of Rabbis for Human Rights. And this is as a result of my advocacy through EAPPI, bringing the United States government down here to be a visible presence of support and making the State Department become an interested party in this discussion. This is integral to what EAPPI is all about. And as a result of press that we brought here and consulate and embassy, Israel was placed under a lot of embarrassment about the desire to demolish these panels, and so far they are still standing. Here's the school. And you can see there's a lot of rebar and stuff because this is a school of 120 children with 2 toilets for girls and 2 for boys, exactly. Not 2 restrooms, 2 toilets for each. And that includes the administrators. And I had to use one day and deeply regret having had to. It was really bad. So the school, without asking for a permit to build toilets, built toilets.
Sorry to interrupt you just a second.
Yeah.
We want to turn off this mic here.
Oh, too much feedback?
We think it might be causing the feedback, so we're just going to turn it off.
Good idea.
Sorry.
Sorry, folks.
Like I said, I'm very unaccustomed to microphones. As we left, these were the toilets and a cistern under construction, which both had demolition orders against them. The cistern was because, up until now, the children have had no water at all in this school. And I can tell you that when we first arrived, it was September, and it was so hot that sweat just rolled down our backs. And the kids would carry water to school in 2-liter pop bottles. And when it was gone at the end of the day, there was no more. So when we would walk them home from this school, they would say to me, my, which is water in Arabic, and I would give them mine. And it was hot by then because we'd been out in the fields and stuff, but they drank it anyway. I'll talk a little bit about the seam zone near Mnazel School and the children that go to school there. I've talked a little bit about the fact that the people that are living there are in between a rock and a hard place, so to speak. Their relatives may not visit them because they don't have a permit to live in the seam zone, and only the people who have a permit to live in the seam zone may enter it. So the exception would be diplomats and internationals. So EAs were allowed to go there. But the United Nations officers are Palestinian, and they are not allowed to enter the seam zone. So if there are humanitarian needs or harassment going on in the seam zone, they would need people like me to tell them. And so that's one of the things that we did there. But mostly we were there to help the children get to and from school through the checkpoint, which was where they had to present their papers. You guys probably some of you have children. So imagine your children being responsible for their identification papers in their backpacks to present them to foreign occupying power with weapons. My kids couldn't even keep track of their homework assignments in their backpacks. I mean, it was scary what was in those backpacks. But these kids have their backpacks thoroughly searched every single day, twice. And they have to keep track of their permits. This was the school checkpoint area again. Here we are walking the children. It's about a 2-kilometer walk from their home to the school. And it's very, very hilly. Past this point, I was not permitted to take photographs. But there is the checkpoint in the background after we've gone through it, and the military base. And then along the other side, where you see the men standing, is a bus stop for the illegal settlement, Mesedot Yehuda. Well, legal or illegal, depending on whether it's Israel or Palestine. I couldn't really tell you. I can't remember this boy's name, but he was such a stitch. He really wanted me to take his picture. That's the closest picture to the checkpoint I ever took. And here are the kids on their way home from school. We had very little language in common with them, but we got attached all the same. A fun group of kids. And they were living in hovels. We didn't realize until it started to rain late in our tour how inadequate their shelter was. So we made a referral to the United Nations humanitarian officer to try to get them better shelter and some other supplies. This is where Kirbet Goen Al Fauca is there along the red line, right along the bottom, quite near the left side. That's the village where the electric infrastructure was taken out. Now we're moving a little bit to the east, still in the very south part, and there's an illegal settlement in this case the blue is Area C, and the settlement is called Shema, and then in the Area A you'll see Kirbet Shuwaika up there, in the upper, the upper left-hand corner. Shuwaika is a Palestinian village, and Shema is an illegal Israeli settlement. So we were called to Shuwaika because in Hebron, an Israeli man had died because someone had thrown a rock at his windshield and his car crashed. And his baby son was also killed in that crash. And it was the week afterwards that this farmer in Shuwaika, who had nothing to do with it, had his olive trees cut. He has a total of 200 trees. He had 38 trees cut. That's just before harvest. And sprayed on a rock in his orchard were the words price tag. A price tag attack is a vengeance attack against someone unrelated to a crime that has been committed. And illegal settlers are now doing price tag attacks not only against Palestinians but also even against Israelis that they think are not supporting their agenda. So we provided supportive presence for the people in Shuwaika, including a demonstration that they had. We're nearing the end of my presentation. I want to show you this video if you want to see it, but it's an emotional video. This is a demolition that took place about 5 weeks ago now in a small Bedouin village called Saadat Thala, where Comet Me had recently installed some electricity. These demolitions were begun by the Army without proper authorization because the cases were still in court, and a phone call eventually halted the destruction. But this took place after I left. I can't swear to be an eyewitness to it. But I can tell you that the man who did it, Guy Batavia, is an Israeli human rights activist with the Villages Group, and I know him. And I don't know how you could fake this, so here we go.
מגרשים את הכפפים עכשיו, זה קשה. מהתנחלות כרמל, מהתנחלות...
They're slowing it down so you can see the soldiers kicking the animals. The women have moved the animals out of the shelter because it's going to be demolished. They're driving the cows out so they won't get hurt. As nearly as I can tell, this is a cave that's been modified to provide better shelter. It has an awning. The women are dragging the water buckets out and the mattresses. Some of the lambs were not able to get out. You know, when I first found this, it had subtitles, but when I downloaded it, they disappeared. So I have to tell you what he's saying. He's showing the animals that have broken legs or have been otherwise injured. Some of them were kicked in the stomach and have stopped eating. Some of them are lame.
مقصورة يعني مقصورة هذا مقصور تريده هذا يريده شوف هذا يريده هذا يريده طلع
Why?
هذا بدموت هذا ضربوه بطنه هذا ضربوه بطنه هذا بدموت
He says since the event these lambs have not eaten, then he thinks they will die. I apologize for this video. I wish these things weren't happening. And I have had to leave it till the end because when I've shown it in the middle, I can't go on. Maybe I'll get used to it. And so it'll be easier. So what can we do? I want to recommend that you network for as much information as you can. try to befriend EAPPI on Facebook, and also look up Friends of Sabeel Fosna. Churches for Middle East Peace is an organization that's going to be having a lobbying event in June. I think it's the 17th and the 18th. You can find them on the web. They have people in Washington all the time. They're keeping tabs on things. I received a message from them today saying that Hillary Clinton has approved some aid package for the Palestinians in the West Bank, which has been opposed by the House Foreign Affairs Committee up until now, but she is going to sidestep them and approve this funding. So, they really do keep tabs on what's going on in Washington, and when you go to their event, they help you learn how to talk to your senators and congressmen in a more effective way, and they keep tabs on what's current in the House and Senate. If you can, go to the West Bank and be with the people. Talk to your elected officials about how you feel about this. That's how you reach me. And I will open for questions now, if you have questions.
How do Israelis or the IDF respond to the work that the ecumenical accompaniment volunteers do? Have you been harassed?
I have been questioned. I was questioned because I had a Palestinian driver. While soldiers were holding guns at me, they would say, "Who is he? Why are you with him? Are you all right?" And then, as we were going to visit that little village of Wadi Jahesh with Zahara and Mara and Alia that I showed you, and we were right across from their village, we were getting ready to go there, and it's not a dangerous place, as you can imagine. It's women and children on a farm in the middle of nowhere. But I was told by the soldiers, "Be careful out here, it can be dangerous." Now, when someone says to you, "Be careful out here, it can be dangerous," it's an interesting message that you receive. Also, I was asked at checkpoints why I was there on more than one occasion. The checkpoint that we monitored was in the south part of the West Bank, where there is no Christian presence. So I can count the people in my house. We're probably the only Christians in that region. And so when I was asked, if all the men here are Muslim, why are you here? It was with sort of a quiet threat. The idea being, if you're here to try to convert people, we can deport you for that. I just said that I was there to talk to the men and see how they were doing, and I think they took me for a ditzy old lady and let me go. But I was not physically injured. And sometimes the soldiers, knowing I was American, many of them are Americans that have moved to Israel and made it their home. So occasionally we would get into, how about them Yankees kind of conversations, which was really a strange experience with guns pointing at you.
Palestinians have never had their own nation state. Is this a reason that they should not have one now? Are there good arguments for that view? Are Palestinians like Native Americans in not previously thinking of their land as a state?
I think that the relationship of Palestinians to the land has been very, very close, but in terms of governance, They have not previously, before 1947, tried to form a state or thought in that way. Mostly, I think, they wanted to live their lives in peace on the land. Is that a reason why they shouldn't have a state now, given the level of harassment that they are experiencing and the fact that they themselves are asking the world to grant them a state? And given the fact that the partition plan that created the nation of Israel was created with the intention that the Palestinians could, in fact, form a state, I see no reason why their self-determination should be questioned. I think they have every reason to need a state.
Where do all the people who move into the settlements come from?
That's a very good question. The people that move into the settlements are people who have usually come from other countries to repatriate to Israel. Israel has a strange thing called the right of return. The Palestinians that were driven from their homes in the Israeli War of Independence and who have taken up residence as exiles in refugee camps or other countries have no right to return. As a matter of fact, if a Palestinian leaves their land for any length of time, they may be barred re-entry. So the right of return in Israel pertains to any person of Jewish ancestry who would like to come and live in the nation of Israel. That means if you had a Jewish ancestry, if you had a Jewish mother, or if you want to convert to Judaism, or if you are an international who wants to make Israel your home and you're not otherwise barred from doing so, you have a right to live in an Israeli settlement. If you are a person of the land, however, a Palestinian or a Bedouin, by virtue of your race alone, you are not permitted to take up residence in an illegal Israeli settlement because you are the wrong kind of people.
Is it the goal of Israel's government to annex the entire West Bank?
Governments are made up of different kinds of people. There are factions in Israel, Zionist extremists, for whom that is in fact exactly the agenda. There are also Israelis who are apolitical, that is, non-political, and just want to live in their neighborhood and raise their children and go to work and have some kind of normalcy similar to perhaps what they had in Brooklyn or wherever they might have come from. They're not interested in the larger question. And there are Israelis who fight the occupation. So to speak of policy, you have to always keep in account that they have political parties that argue among themselves and so on. I don't believe you could pin the government down and make them admit that the goal is to annex all of the West Bank. And no one is using the word annex at this point. What we are using is words like apparent policy of quiet transfer, which is expressly against the Geneva Convention. The Geneva Convention, Convention number 4, Section 3, Article 49, if my memory serves, states that it is illegal under international law to move the population of an occupying power into an occupied place. And it is also illegal, in the same section, but a different number, it is also illegal to require that the population indigenous to that area move away. The only way they can be forced to move is under direct threat from an actual active military action. As, for instance, if a village was going to be attacked, the occupying power might move the people out temporarily. The Geneva Convention also requires that the occupying power provide for the needs of the local population and take special care of the children. All of these points have been ignored is too thin a word. On none of these points has Israel done what they are required to do in international law. In fact, they have done the opposite.
Well, the hour is getting late, folks. Thank you all for coming, and stay tuned for the events we mentioned. And thanks to Christine so much for coming.
I have one advocacy request for you. The village of Susia, which is the village where Abed Nawaja and his father Abu Jihad are living, the ones that have been evicted so many times, that tent village with the little boy and the dog, that entire village is under imminent demolition threat. If you are leaving here tonight and you would like to make a difference, in the back there are papers that say Susia, and they are from the United Nations OCHA website. They can be downloaded in color if you want, and what I'm asking people to do, if you're concerned enough to write a letter, include that in the letter and send it to your congressman. A lot of congressmen have no idea what's going on in the West Bank, and the more we can tell them, the better off these people in the West Bank will be. Thank you so much for coming tonight.